Hello and welcome to Beyond the TARDIS, the show where me and Josh take a back seat from the complete review and allow for people far and wide to pop into our studio and give us their view on our favourite television series. Today I'd like to introduce the televisual academic who is perfectly at home analysing the ins and outs of 1960 television. Please welcome Kenneth Longden to the show.
Hello.
Now, we've got some real pedigree today in the form that we will be able to have a proper discussion about not only the history of this episode, the context of where it was made, but we'd also, of course, like to throw you those usual fan questions about Doctor Who.
Okay.
So I think we'll get those out of the way pronto. So first, this is just the obvious question, because of course this show, the basis of the show is away from our usual Doctor Who reviews where we get people to come in and chat about the series. So first of all is the obvious question, have you ever seen Doctor Who?
Yes, I would be fair to say I grew up with Doctor Who, but that's no different from a lot of people, really, unless you were born, unfortunately, in the gap, you know.
Yeah.
The hiatus. But yes, Doctor Who, it was always there. And it's funny because it's a bit like the way we watch television anyhow. It's something that we glance at. So there were some series that I really watched thoroughly in my childhood and in adulthood. And there were some that passed me by, you know.
Was
Yes.
Doctor Who one that passed you by?
Some episodes passed me by. Which one? Oh, well, Sylvester McCoy springs to mind is the one. I don't really know his oeuvre at all. Yeah.
What programs did you watch when you were younger? Anything sort of BBC content similar to Doctor Who, or are we talking over on the other side?
Oh, the other side being ITV.
Yes, of course.
BBC. I watched a lot of Play for Today's, and I watched a lot of popular television programs like everybody else. I mean, when we were growing up, it's TV 1, TV 2 era, and so therefore you weren't spoilt with a massive amount of channels. You actually were restricted. You were limited in what you viewed, and so I'm of a generation where most of the things I watched, everybody else in my generation watched, simply because there wasn't any channel hopping or anything like that.
Right now, to move on to a different sort of question entirely, but along the same lines, do you remember your first experience of Doctor Who?
Yeah, I do.
Do you? Oh, okay, that's good.
I do.
We got off to a good start then on this show.
It was actually a sort of promotion for Doctor Who, the forthcoming series.
Okay.
And I was very, very young, and it actually showed John Pertwee. I think it must have been one of his final series, but John Pertwee from what I can remember, he was climbing through a tunnel or something, and a Dalek suddenly appears, and it terrified me. I was very young, but it absolutely terrified me. It stuck in the brain. So that's my first encounter with it. The first time of watching it was when Tom Baker, the very first Tom Baker episode.
Robots, would that be?
Yeah.
Do you remember when you sort of this is also a theme we like to go first Doctor Who experience? Do you remember when you last watched Doctor Who, as in when you last would have watched it, bar the episode we told you to watch for today, of course?
No, Christmas special.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you're an avid viewer still today.
I do. Well, I got back into it. I think the 2005 reboots sort of rekindled my interest in it for lots of reasons, mainly academic, because at the time I was desperately looking for something in popular culture and popular fictions that I could write about. And the reboots came along at just the right time, actually, because, well, not simply because it was Doctor Who, but it was a programme that sort of was emblematic of the changes that were going on in television at the time as well.
Would you like to briefly explain that sort of thing and how it links in? You mentioned TV1 and TV2, and some of our listeners might not be aware of what those distinctions mean, and how you can link that, if you could cleverly link that to classic and new Doctor Who and how they link in
Okay,
there.
well, the episode we're going to be talking about today is The Survivors, which is William Hartnell, and that generally comes under TV1.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an era of scarcity. There's really only 2 channels to watch in Britain at the time. And then that sort of lasts a long time, from the late 1950s all the way through to the 1980s. And then we have changes, largely satellite technology, certain aspects of legislation such as deregulation of certain broadcasters, and that changes the TV landscape. We get new channels. All of a sudden we get Channel 4 and then later Channel 5. So that's generally called TV2 era. And then we go into the TV3 era, where television becomes part of this digital revolution. Mm-hmm. And the reboot, the 2005 reboot Doctor Who, fits that TV3 era perfectly. It's convergence culture. Everything comes together. You said that you watched the show, and of course for academic reasons, and when you were younger, as purely as a viewer. Yeah. What is your, if you could say, your overall opinion of Doctor Who as a series? And would you be able to answer this as a child and as you are now? So either as an academic as you are now, or sort of your personal opinion, whichever you... Well, it's funny because as an academic, it actually relates to the last answer I gave. Okay. One of the things that's interesting about Doctor Who, and most academics of television will tell you this, is its longevity. It means it spans the 3 eras, the TV1, TV2 and the TV3 era. And so as a television history, it's very, very useful, because we don't just view it as a program, as a series in itself. We can see how the series represents the many changes in television, as well as society and culture too, simply because it's been going on for that long. And oddly enough, when it goes off the air, that tells us something about television as well, because it goes off the air for specific television reasons. It can't compete with all the new programs that are coming in because of the new channels. It has to change. So that's the academic point of view. As a child, what did I think of Doctor Who? Well, television is a bit like a ritual. It's like a cultural ritual, and that's to do with scheduling. And so Doctor Who, for me as a child, was always, well, it's Saturday and it's tea time, and the new series now, with its Christmas specials, etc., its one-offs, that's completely new. That's changed really Doctor Who in certain ways. But as a child, for me it was Saturday night entertainment.
Yeah. So you did enjoy it then as a child, I take it?
Yeah, everybody did. Everybody watched it, even the ones that said they didn't. I have uncles.
Just like today, isn't it?
well, that's it. I had uncles that would parents that would sort of complain Doctor Who was on, but they never turned it off. So everybody knew Doctor Who, and everybody watched it.
Do you have, now I warned you that we were going to get the fanish questions out of the way.
Yeah.
Do you have a favourite Doctor, companion, story, or, this is the really ridiculous one, theme tune? Right. You don't have to answer the last one, but the first 3, if there's any...
What's it? The favourite Doctor? Well, it's David Tennant, and I have absolutely no hesitation.
Okay, why is your favourite Doctor David Tennant?
I just think everything he brings to it, and also he appears in, I think, particularly strong episodes.
I can agree there.
I think the writing was really good for David Tennant, and I think perhaps he brought that out. Yeah. And I thought his performance was always top notch, and he added something to that character in a way that I don't think the other Doctors sort of have. Normally we would talk about great actors in terms of gravitas, but not with David Tennant. He's quite a natural. He's very laid back, but at the same time he can be very serious. He brought lots to that part, So David Tennant for me, definitely. Favourite companion? Oh, well, Rose, I would have to say, because I could see the two together. Yeah, Rose.
Any particular reason, or simply because of the relationship?
I think you can't divorce them from the relationship. But
Okay.
again, I think she did bring something new to that.
Yeah,
that
definitely.
companion relationship too, which is very interesting. Either as a viewer or as an academic, it changed the dimension a little bit.
And then your favourite story, if you particularly remember any
Yeah.
story that grabbed you either as a kid or as an adult, as an academic.
Utopia.
That's a particular favourite of mine, I
Yeah.
must admit. A very good story.
Yeah, I wrote on that.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
I know we're not discussing the episode. But could you explain to listeners what sort of thing you say? I'm sure we'll be interested.
I was trying at the time. I was trying to sort of look at how Doctor Who had changed. I was actually looking at Cool Nation branding, which is to do with transnationalism.
Yeah.
But I think that's what happens in the Tennant era, but also with Utopia. I think they're kind of pushing this idea of, Britain is cool, Britain is with it.
Mm-hmm.
In the episodes leading up to Utopia and the episodes after Utopia. But I think Utopia is quite interesting. So you have Derek Jacobi in there. And
I think he's amazing in that,
Yeah.
Derek Jacobi. I think he's brilliant.
So there was lots of other reasons why I thought Utopia. I was studying utopian fiction at the time as well. And I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. I'll have a look at this. There was loads of reasons for it. And it fascinates me even now.
Okay.
So,
Do you like as much the two preceding parts that follow that as well? Just as much as Utopia? Or
as much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Obvious question before we move on to the story at hand this week.
It was regeneration. I was.
Oh, yeah.
That's what it was. It's just come to me. There's always these shots of Cardiff.
Yes, this is Cool Nation branding, if you just quickly explain that.
But also, it's to do with the post-industrial. And that's because these sites, when they take a shot of the TARDIS outside the Cardiff, I forgot the name of the building now.
Oh my word! It's going to.
It's got the Welsh.
Yes,
thing.
It's the Millennium. It's not the Millennium.
Yeah,
Stadium.
it's
Is
the
it
Millennium.
Stadium?
No, it's something like that. But it's
something like that.
It's,
Tell us home,
it's
listeners.
down by the docks.
Yeah,
and of course it's part of a regeneration scheme, a regeneration project.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, well, that's interesting because they have the Doctor who's synonymous with regeneration.
Yeah.
The location is a regenerated site. And the new Doctor, David Tennant, is part of this post-industrial Doctor Who. And so that's why I was talking about it.
That's okay.
Yeah, that's it.
You could argue as well that Cardiff, the sort of showing off Cardiff, is part of the reason that Torchwood, the TV series, was formed as a way to show off Cardiff's sort of
the
prowess.
connection between Cardiff, regeneration, and Doctor Who is quite deliberate, and it's quite interesting as well.
Yeah. Well, arguably, what do you believe about the connection between Doctor Who and London and BBC Television Centre, which is more what we should probably be talking about with as we move on to this. But the last question before we talk about the episode: why do you think Doctor Who has lasted as long as it has?
Well, if I knew that, I'd be writing for them and I'd be making lots of money. I don't know. I think.
See, this is the killer question. I know lots of people always ask this, and the simple answer is, yeah, and it is a very hard one. I thought about it, and I can't give an answer. So
I think ritual has a part of it. I think this idea of continuity has something to do with it. The BBC are very big on continuity. They like to. It's how they sell programs. This has a heritage, you know. This belongs to the BBC, and the BBC has this continuity of providing great drama and great entertainment. I think that's certainly in there. And of course, loyalty. There's fan loyalty. It's the fans that brought the programme back. It's the fans that kept the programme alive in the popular imagination when it was off air. You know, don't underestimate fan power. You know, it's quite important. And to the credit of BBC, they recognise that too.
Yeah, which is quite something. We won't be, well, I guess I guess we wouldn't be. I don't know. Would we be discussing this now if the show was still going? If it had died a couple of years ago, I don't know. Probably not. To talk about the episode that we recently watched was the 1963 episode, "The Survivors," which is the 6th ever episode of Doctor Who. And a quick plot synopsis for those who aren't in the know. But if you do listen to this and my previous review of this, please, we'd much like you to watch it and then come to the review afterwards. I don't see the point of not watching something then coming to a review, and it is over 50 years old, so you got no excuse for spoilers or anything. But basically, the Doctor, Ian, Barbara, and Susan land on a petrified forest, which is in fact the planet Skaro, where inside a metal bunker, a metal city, which appears to be much like a bunker, they find a certain race of alien creatures who we've never seen before in Doctor Who. This is the first ever time we see an alien race. They kidnap the Doctor, Susan, Ian, and Barbara, lock them up, and Susan has to go on a treacherous journey through a jungle to find some anti-radiation drugs, as the whole planet is riddled with radiation. Kenneth, what did you think of the episode personally? What did you think going into it and then coming out of it?
Well, personally,
yeah.
Again, it's that theme music, watching it, and you hear the theme music, you see the howl around effect, and it takes you straight back to your childhood. It's at once familiar but different, because it's not the same opening as I knew as a child.
Which was John Pertwee? Was it Tom Baker or John Pertwee? Tom Baker.
Yeah. And so
I take it that's your favourite theme music, to answer the previous question.
I do like the more recent ones too.
Yeah.
You know,
I'm not too fond of Capaldi's.
Well, the earlier ones will kind of jog on me at a personal level.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it takes me straight back. You know, but I'm quite happy with all the others.
Okay.
You know? So anyhow, watching
anyway, yes,
this,
the point.
Yeah, I watched this and I watched the howl around, and of course it's black and white. And what got me straight away was the flat studio sets, you know, which is typical of, you know, Doctor Who. I mean, for many fans of Doctor Who, of the classic series, that's how we know it. You know, it's Though, yes, later on they did location shots.
To the first location shoot only occurred a year into Doctor Who in June 1964. So we're a long way from getting out of Lime Grove Studios, which they recorded at. So it's all studio bound, which is quite interesting.
It is, and again, this refers back to what I was talking about before, about why Doctor Who is good for television history, because I can just look at that episode, The Survivors, which is very studio bound. It's I mean, that is a feature of early British television science fiction,
and early British television in general, I would say, to a degree.
Yes,
to a degree, though.
Definitely, and yet this episode, and arguably An Unearthly Child, start showing signs of a change in television.
Definitely,
at the
yes.
time. I quite like what Chapman says with regard to early Doctor Who, and in particular the Hartnell Doctor Who, is that, you know, there's so many different things coming together to make this programme different. The BBC are suddenly realising that television is more popular than radio.
Yes.
So all of a sudden the BBC start taking television a little bit more seriously.
Would you say Doctor Who is one of the first efforts in that? I know that it was the formation was to create that Saturday night slot that was missing. Would you say this is a big push towards that?
I think, I think they're looking for a programme that... This is what's so fascinating. They're looking for a programme that will go along with these changes, their own ideas about how television should change. And interestingly enough, that's what they do in 2005 when the BBC are trying to modify and go digital, and they're looking for a flagship programme that will show off this new technology and this new policy.
And who better?
And they choose
else?
Doctor Who. So it's quite fascinating. And so looking at the survivors, they're still studio bound, and therefore it's very dialogue driven as well. And one of the reasons for that is because it's shot as live.
Yes, and this is me and Josh in our reviews have talked a lot of times about the importance of blocking in as live programming, and how Doctor Who is very ahead of its time in the way it's blocked and the way it's directed around that blocking.
Yeah.
And despite the sort of tight knit sets, the way it's blocked, which is particularly important in The Survivors. I don't know if you recall the shot where the Doctor and Susan are in a small, quite dark, low-lit room.
Yeah.
They come out, the camera pulls back to reveal the Daleks, and it uses that sense of space.
Yeah.
But I don't know what you think of that, as you mentioned, as live. The sort of technical prowess, I think, is clear in an episode like this, of getting everything right on the go, on the night.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's Verity Lambert that actually that says that they used, they made the most of the restrictions, the limitations that they had, and it forced them to be innovative.
Mm-hmm.
And that's indeed what they were, you know. But they were innovative because, you know, it was so difficult to do anything else, really. And I think you can see that in certainly in The Survivors. To a modern audience, it's going to look very sort of staid and theatrical.
Yes.
But most television did that as well. And also, they're learning off one-off dramas like Play for Today. And the BBC thought those were the best kind of, you know, hybrid television programs to show. So Doctor Who is kind of a hybrid. It's moving towards popular entertainment, but it's
also
still referring back to this sort of drama on TV idea too. So they're getting the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
I think the thing that really strikes me straight away with Survivors as well is the Doctor himself, William Hartnell.
Yeah. What I was going to move on to characters. What do you think of the? Because if you grew up with Tom Baker, did you know of William Hartnell? Because this always interests me. Because of course, when I was growing up with Doctor Who, I started watching by the UK Gold repeats. In the early 2000s. Right. So I knew of Doctor Who and was a big fan before it came back. And when it came back, of course, that was when everyone knows what I'm talking about. Suddenly, everyone knows it. And I jumped on that bandwagon and loved it. But I knew all these old Doctors. I knew that one went to two, two went to three.
I didn't.
See, exactly. What was that like growing up as you, with Tom Baker on the screen every week?
Well, you always think your Doctor is the first one.
Yeah.
To a certain extent. Well, that's how I thought. And so Hartnell and Troughton and Pertwee were all, they weren't important, and we didn't seem to think, oh, well, it's funny. We actually thought that Tom Baker was meant to be an improvement.
Yes.
You know,
I mean, he did do so long as well.
Yeah, we never saw it as a regeneration or as continuity. We just thought, oh, they've got another actor in because he's better than the last one. It's only years later that we realised, well, no, it's a little bit more than that.
I mean, I know you did. You made your Sylvester McCoy comment earlier, so I won't bring that up again.
No, don't. No, so it is a bit like... So Hartnell's quite interesting because in this particular episode, Survivors, he's frail.
Yes.
You know, and that's a complete contrast to the current Doctors that we see, starting with Eccleston and Tennant and on, because, they're sort of pitched to fit the superhero market to a certain extent. So they tend to be made a little bit more resilient, all-knowing and...
Hero shots with coats flapping in the wind.
Exactly, yes. And yet, so the thing that struck me straight away was how frail he was.
Do you like that as a point of contrast?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I know the folklore was that when he his first shooting, they found him far too abrasive.
Yes, the pilot episode of Doctor Who we're referring to here, and they lightened him up, but he's still got quite a... At this point in history, which is interesting, the Doctor is not... I feel he's not... We've talked about this a lot on the main review.
He's not fully formed.
And he's not the hero. Yeah, I don't think.
He's not.
Ian is the typical heroic man.
And that is exactly how Chapman writes quite extensively on this about how when they're pitching this program, they see the hero as Ian.
Yeah.
Not the Doctor.
Which is kind of weird, isn't it?
It is.
From our modern eyes.
It is really strange. And so I think you kind of see that going on. It did surprise me how he was. I mean, also, I have to bear in mind that I watched that wonderful docudrama, An Adventure in Space and Time.
I was going to bring it up.
And I think, again, it's another BBC television history, and quite fascinating too. And so there we get the backstory of Hartnell, and apparently it's Hartnell that says, where's his twinkle?
Yes.
Because Hartnell thinks he's too stern and too old and grumpy, and says he needs something. He needs a twinkle.
Yeah, William Hartnell didn't want to do it because, of course, he's been used to, you of course know, many hardline soldier army roles.
Yeah.
And he wanted to do something lighter,
That's
which
right.
he brings about in the Doctor and in this episode. But not particularly in this episode, for instance. There's something underneath.
Yeah.
I feel, but he's a bit abrasive to Susan. He mocks her and calls her just a child. And
Yeah.
of course, if you in this episode, he tricks them all to going into the city by faking, we've got no fluid in the fluid link left.
No mercury.
Yes. And it's all one big deception. I feel that's really interesting. You would never see, say, David Tennant or even someone like Tom Baker, I feel, do that. And it just shows how much change there has since here to even, say, 10 years on.
To a certain extent. And I think there's still, it's what I said before. He's not fully formed. The Doctor character isn't fully formed. It's very early days. They still seem undecided on whether he should be the focus or the other characters. But also, I think the relationship, the Doctor and Susan and Barbara, is very typical, certainly of British science fiction at the time, the 1960s, in this, trying to show this generation gap.
Yeah.
And there is this kind of unspoken conflict between the older generation and the younger generation.
Which is, in fact, me and Josh have mentioned in our reviews for the past 6 weeks. We've talked about this. There is a conflict between Barbara and Susan as sort of matriarch and sort of student, and Ian and the Doctor as the alpha male and the older male who thinks he can do everything, but Ian's the strong one. Yeah,
I don't think. I mean, again, I don't think the Doctor's fully formed at this point. So you have these interesting sort of dynamics going on. But also, I think that they're tapping into very much prevalent themes at the time in science fiction. And you see it in, The Village of the Damned, and you see it in The Time Machine, George Powell's The Time Machine, the film that came out at the time. And so these science fiction films are constantly raising this issue, and I think we see it in the Survivors too.
What do you? I'm gonna move on. What do you think of in regards to Susan? Now, I did an essay on this.
Go on.
And me and Josh have discussed this week upon week. What do we feel regarding the representation of Susan as a woman in this story? In the fact that she, as a child, has to pretty much face her fear to do something alone.
Yeah.
How do you feel that? How did that come across to you in the story? Do you feel it came across well, or perhaps a bit derogatory?
I think it's brave for the time.
Yeah.
I think it's forward-thinking for the time. I mean, there's this stereotypical idea that she's emotional.
Yeah.
Anyhow, which most women characters were portrayed in that way.
I feel it's overdone in certain episodes, but I feel this kind of, because of the situation, once going back to direction, the way it's shot, all the forest scenes, it works, I feel, in this.
I think you're right. I mean, there's that wonderful shot at the end where she's reached the TARDIS and she's picked up the vials of antidotes or whatever.
Little monologue as well.
Yeah.
Incidentally, this is one thing I've noted in watching this all. This is the first instance of internal monologue in Doctor Who.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting. That's a really good directorial idea.
It's very interesting, and it's also very interesting that they show her having almost a doubt about having to go back, but then confronts that fear and moves on.
Which is our cliffhanger.
Yeah, exactly. And it ends on that. And it's interesting that it ends on her as well.
Yeah, we've not... All the focus before now has been... I feel every other character has been put in trouble yet so far, apart from... I'm trying to think of all the cliffhangers from the previous few.
Yeah.
I think you're right. This is the first time the focus has been on Susan.
It is.
For the cliffhanger.
And so I found that quite interesting. That was an interesting move, really, in the narrative.
Do you feel it paid off, then?
Definitely.
What do you feel about the... Well, contrast, Ian's sort of hot-headed headstrongness, shall we say, about wanting to walk.
I think the thing that gets me about Ian is his cardigan or his jumper. It's sort of... I don't know. I
don't know if you can be a big, strong man with a cardigan like that.
You can't.
Well, he ditches it at the end of the story.
Well, rightly so.
Yeah.
His credibility's shot by then anyhow. But I don't know. I think Ian... It's funny how they persist with, that grouping. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it works at all. I mean,
really?
We look at it now.
Well, it's iconic to people like me now as fans.
Yes. Yeah.
That's like the original sort of family, you know what I mean?
Exactly. And I don't think... I think... it's more noticeable in the later versions of Doctor Who, and certainly now. They tried it a little bit with Pond.
Oh, Amy and Rory.
Yeah, they tried it a little bit in that, and I didn't particularly like it then.
You mean the more than one companion? You feel
that's right.
Oh, you're one of the. You feel that more than one companion is too much.
Yeah, I do. Three's a crowd.
I think in the 1980s it got too much.
Yeah.
When you had Adric, Nyssa, and Tegan with
That's
Peter
right.
Davison, and because of course they weren't all as well developed as say Ian, Barbara, and Susan were here, that was a little bit more of a problem in here. I think. But I feel because this is the formation of the series, it kind of. We couldn't immediately identify with the Doctor, so we need all these other characters around him to identify with him, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I
feel
suppose so.
It might not have worked as well as if it was just one person meeting it. I don't know.
But I still felt myself secretly cheering inside when Ian gets zapped by the Daleks and he can't walk. Because I thought, well, at least it'll keep him still for a minute, and we won't see him moving around the set too much. His movement really wasn't very good.
What do you mean? You mean when he tried to walk?
Yeah, when he tried to walk and.
What do you? I think as a performer though, William Russell's great in this. There's an energy to him. Do you disagree?
I think the jury's out there.
Oh, go on, your opinion. I want to.
I just don't know. I just think I don't know what he's supposed to represent. I mean, everybody says he's supposed to represent the hero sort of character type. I don't think if that's the case, I don't think he did it very well.
Oh, okay.
So, but interestingly, they're talking about character developments originally. The Doctor's character, and this is something Chapman sort of managed to find digging around in the archives, that they wanted the Doctor as somebody who other people didn't know who he was. He seems not to remember where he has come from.
Yes.
He is suspicious and capable of sudden malignance. He seems to have some unidentified enemy. He is searching for something as well as fleeing from someone.
Is that from the original character brief?
It is.
I have read that.
Yeah. And
I recognise the wording.
Well, that's something that's actually been played upon over the years, isn't it?
Yes, definitely.
If you think about it.
So it's still there. That's what I mean.
Still there.
The roots are still there, whether or not it comes out fully in this.
Yeah. I think thematically with the survivors as well, is the idea of the neutron bomb.
I was about to bring
that
up.
Radiation.
Yeah.
I think that's quite interesting.
What do you, and I'm going to ask this as from, to someone knowing about television histories, the influence of sort of real world events, because I feel the neutron bomb in here and sort of leaving stuff still standing, radiation, that all could be quite allegoric, shall we say, for the period.
Well, it's a direct reference in many senses, and actually typical of science fiction at the time.
And Terry Nation, especially, because he did Survivors in the 1975.
Yeah.
Very similar title to this one.
I know.
But
it's, I mean, let's face it, the Doctor Who series started really just after the assassination of Kennedy. Well, the next day, isn't it?
I've got a point here. This episode was recorded the night they found out. So they'd literally gone on from knowing that piece of information into the studio to record the survivors.
Well, if you connect Kennedy's the Cuban crisis, the whole world was scared of nuclear exchange, but 1950s and 1960s, early 1960s science fiction is constantly preoccupied with fear of radiation, fear of contamination. And so you see these themes. They're quite obvious in this episode.
Yeah.
And they are preoccupations of a lot of science fiction as well.
How do you think the Daleks fit into that role?
Well, the Daleks are interesting. I mean, the story behind the Daleks is that they're allegorical of the Nazis.
Yes.
And again, that is another feature of British science fiction.
It doesn't go away for a while, does it?
No. But to think about it, it's only about 15 years after the Second World War, which isn't a long time. So it's still fresh in the memory of a lot of people. But it is prevalent in British science fiction more so than America.
It's interesting, isn't it?
It is interesting. The enemy is always kind of referred back to the Nazis.
I mean, in a later episode, the Dalek Invasion of Earth, part 6 of that, called Flashpoint, the Daleks literally push their plungers into the air. And there's a good shot of them, low-angle shot of them doing that, and it's sort of the iconic shot to go, I wonder what that could be a reference to.
But isn't it amazing that perhaps if you'd have pitched a sort of monster or an enemy like that now, would it work? I mean, I'm not sure.
I mean, I think the Daleks work because they never whap it on the head and say, this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
Whereas, and I know this is a story.
It ignores the brief that, I mean, they were told we want
no BEMs.
No BEMs, no bug-eyed monsters. And
Mr. Newman, of course,
Newman, And then all of a sudden these Daleks come in, and they prove to be absolutely popular.
Well, I've got some figures here for you.
Yeah.
If this episode was watched by 6.4 million viewers.
Right.
The week after the introduction of the Daleks, popped up to 8.9 million. And then by episode 6 of this story, it was getting 10.4 million viewers.
Yeah, 10 is the one. And that saves the program, doesn't it?
And that's where they go. And that's by episode. And they were originally going to do a 13-episode run.
Yeah.
And out of the 13, I'm trying to work out, it would have been episode 9, I believe, where they hit that 10.4. Then it was like, right, you can run after 13.
That's right, yeah.
But why?
But it's the Daleks that are generally being held as responsible for that success.
I think just as much as the Daleks, it is this story in general. I know me and Josh have talked about it. 'Cause it's very different to the first story.
Yeah.
Very, very different.
Yeah.
It kind of establishes the Doctor Who formula. Part 1 of the story is we explore.
Yeah.
Part 2, this is we start getting into trouble. Characters have to split up and do stuff, which is classic Doctor Who, isn't it? And this formula is what makes it successful, which is why Doctor Who always does this similar sort of things. What do you think? Do you think the Daleks are rightly successful? What did you think of them in this story?
Well, yeah, it goes back to one of the first questions I answered. What is the thing I remember? What's my first memory of Doctor Who?
Of course,
and it is the Daleks.
Why do you think that?
It's a combination of a lot of things, isn't it? It's the voice, I suppose. It's the message that it gives across, that they're dispassionate, ruthless killers. They look odd,
They do. What do you think of their appearance in this? I think it's quite...
I can't ever get away from the fact that it looks like they have a plunger.
Yeah.
I mean...
Originally, they were meant to be 2 claws, but they couldn't afford it.
Yeah, I have heard that.
And do you know how much it cost them for the 4 Dalek props?
Go on.
In modern money, it would come to £100.
Yeah.
For all 4, so they could only afford 4 Dalek props.
But it's funny, BC, that's...
I feel like works in its favour for this, because they are in a little bunker. If there's only 4, it's tight, confined, that sense of claustrophobia, which I think this story does go for.
And they're mechanical. And I think there's lots of research written on if it's a robot or something mechanical rather than something...
Well, there is something inside them.
Animal, I know, but the outside appearance is... it projects ideas of futuristic society.
Yeah.
It projects ideas of cold mechanical thinking, even though, as you quite rightly point out, there's a living creature inside.
As we'll see later on in the story.
Yeah. It's still this sort of automaton sort of thing going on. And has an interesting effect, I think. But also, I mean, we've just been talking about how much it costs and everything.
Yeah.
For many science fiction television fans, the sort of cheap budgets are the things that make them so different from the films, and therefore it's one of the reasons why some people prefer them.
Yeah.
I mean, you just mentioned that figure. The one I can remember, the American one, which is famous for it, is Captain Video. And they had an episode budget for special effects of $26, which...
Blimey.
Which is, I mean, all right, taking into account inflation now, it's still nothing.
Another example of that. Blake Seven's first season, your favourite, had a special effects budget of what would come in modern money to £50.
Yeah, well,
which is equally shocking, isn't it?
Worse, isn't it? I mean, it's just dreadful. But this is a feature. If we're looking at science fiction television, one of the features up until the late 1980s, one of the features of science fiction television is very little money is spent.
Why do you think that is? I mean, I know there's arguably the BBC thing, the whole looking down at science fiction, which occurs a lot in the 1980s. I think you'll agree that led to Doctor Who's downfall. Yeah. Do you think this was? I think at this point in time now, the stories we're watching, they are kind of throwing all the resources they have at it, but it's still struggling. Is this a drama? Is this a kids show? What is it? Well,
television. Well, science fiction television is originally considered by both in America and Britain. Well, no, America more than Britain. Science fiction is considered a children's genre. In Britain, it was a little bit different after the war because the first real big hit for the BBC is Quatermass Experiment, which was pitched at an adult audience,
and it was quite frightening. There was the announcements before each episode, wasn't there, about nervous dispositions?
It was event television. It was one of the first examples of event television.
Am I right in thinking only 2 parts exist of the very first?
Yeah, the originals. Yeah, they've lost them. But that formula proved so successful. They were made into films, and there were other series that followed. So the BBC wasn't kind of strangers to science fiction on television. The Quatermass is a good example of how they had already had success on their hands, but they really didn't want to throw money at these things. But also, because they're shot as live, there's limited scope for special effects anyhow.
Yeah, of course.
And so there's a combination of both.
I don't think it shows in an episode like this, bar maybe Susan running through a forest jogging on the spot.
That's right.
Maybe that's the only sort of thing that stood out to me. The rest of it, I was thoroughly engaged because everyone was giving it their all performance-wise.
Although with this episode, they do show the city in the background, which is projected on the back. And that's also interesting because they're trying to project sort of outside location. They're trying to project depth.
Well, that's the interesting thing about these early Doctor Who's, isn't it? Getting scale in such a small space. I don't know if you know about Lime Grove Studios, where it was recorded.
Right. Yeah.
Studio D, which is one of the smallest, one of the warmest. When they got too warm, the sprinklers came on in the middle of recording. Terrible conditions. I know Verity Lambert, the producer, was constantly trying to push, get us out, get us television centre, which they eventually did when they started getting the viewers. But at the moment, they were still stuck here. And it's interesting to see how they do it.
It is remarkable. And they make the most of what they have. Also, there was big, when Doctor Who was first commissioned, the costume departments and the prop departments just were in uproar about it.
Yeah.
They were saying, how can you commission a science fiction program? Do you know how much work that gives us? We don't have the resources. And it's just one of these odd facts about science fiction on television, certainly in this country up until a certain point, that they are, no matter how successful it is, they're still reluctant to throw money at it.
That's life, isn't it? Fact of life. What do you think of the way this episode is written in regards to Terry Nation, who becomes a staple of arguably British television in the thriller and fantasy science fiction genre? Yeah,
well, I think it's interesting that they split this up. The serial, an Unearthly Child, serial storyline, and it kind of works. It gives him time to develop sort of characters, ideas, and I think we see that in this as well. You see it with the beginning, you see it at the ending, how he's bracketing the story. You know, at the beginning of this episode, they're looking for Barbara. And at the end, you know, we leave it with Susan, that she's about to have to go back through the forest to return to the city. I think it's quite interesting. I think this is somebody who understands the television genre quite well. He understands the format quite well. He knows what he has to do. Also, he's writing for the technology that's available as well. He's writing because of the sets as well. He's not doing location shooting. No. So he has to write to meet the conditions of the studio. So, what do you think structurally? This is one thing that always is thrown at Classic Who, is the term padding. Do you think this episode goes along well and everything that's in there needs to be there in terms of characters, in terms of scenes? I think there is padding in this, you know, especially with the illness. I think Ian's leg stuff, maybe. Yes, that's what I mean. All the stuff with the Daleks, the Doctor's interrogation. I thought that was a particularly nice scene. Yeah, because they don't have to shoot Ian's legs away. Yeah. I'm kind of glad they did, but I mean, they don't have to. Yeah. It's, although, well, perhaps they do. Perhaps they have to show what the Daleks are made of and what they're capable of. I guess that's how we get Susan to face her fears. That's what we discussed. We like Ian being a hero is now like, you know, he can finally go on the back burner a bit. Susan can do something. Yeah, it's not written with any great spectacle in mind. It's very dialogue heavy, you know. Which I think works for early 60s Doctor Who. It progresses the story. Well, it's what I was saying before, that they're sort of learning from Play for Today sort of programmes that the BBC would have put on, and they're kind of trying to innovate. So they're all learning as they go along. I think that's one of the interesting things about this episode, is that the Doctor's not fully formed, the Daleks have just been introduced. So we're seeing the genesis of something that you know, becomes very big. How does this place within television in general at the time? How's it placed? Yeah. Sorry, in what way? As in what ways, and how does it in the television landscape at the time? Would this be shocking? Would this be something that people would recognise immediately as being new, or would it just simply alienate people? I think it would have been considered very new. I mean, right from the opening title sequence and the music. I think we all underestimate the importance of that. Well, we do, because we've become blasé about it. I feel the same about the Daleks as well. We've all become so used to them as being on tea towels, slippers. That's it. They've slipped into popular culture, and to a certain extent, their menace has been sort of diluted. Yeah, but definitely. As I was saying at the beginning, my first memory of Doctor Who is the Daleks. You know, there's a thought that the reason why the Daleks sort of catch on is because they're quite easy to imitate. Yeah, it is. You've seen those stories about children going with our arms bins on their heads, going exterminate, stuff like that. I mean, they are very imitatable, you know. I think the audience would have, in terms of early 60s television, it would have been seen as new. The title in the opening title credits, the music, that would have been seen new. The Daleks, the futuristic city, that would have been seen as new, very new. And again, it's the BBC are also trying to learn how television works effectively. They've recognised that television is the dominant medium now. It's taken over radio. And so they're trying to do something very, very different. And it's interesting where it's positioned as well in the schedule. Yes, 5:15. Yeah, I mean, they're noticing there's a drop-off point in the viewing at that point. What show was it between it? Jukebox Jury and Jukebox Jury. That's the one. So they're kind of well, the general story is that it's originally aimed at educating children, isn't it? Well, science. Which did not. But you can't see that, can you? No. Although Verity Lambert said, "Well, yeah, but you know that doesn't mean we have to dumb down." She didn't say. Yeah,
There's a couple of stuff later on in this story about how the Daleks run from sort of bumper car magnetic. What's the word?
Oh yeah, they're powered by electromagnetic.
Yes.
impulse or
From the
something like
floor.
Yeah.
They say like the smell of bumper cars, something like that. You know?
That's right. Yeah.
And then later on, there's some more stuff like that. Episode 6, I believe. There's stuff sprinkled in there, but it's not. Never does it take itself too seriously.
No. It's a funny. I think perhaps that's what makes it quite an original television program. I mean, the other one is, I think it's Matt Hills that points out that having a Time Lord, having a time traveller, is ideal for television because it's not just a time machine; it's a genre machine.
Yes, that's a very good term.
You can move
actually.
around. You know, you can get 1 week you could be in the Wild West of 1870s. The next week you could be in Rome. The following week you could be in the future. But so I think it's a very interesting vehicle. Very interesting. I'm surprised it wasn't thought of before.
Really?
Yeah, because there were so many really strange ideas for science fiction programs before Doctor Who. If you look at Quatermass now, you'd think, well, how on earth, who would have predicted the success of Quatermass? You know, so these programs are touching a nerve at a certain time, and they're resonating with the viewing public for whatever reason. I've explained the generation gap that seems to be there in Doctor Who. There's this idea of a modern future world that seems to be there in Doctor Who, which was possibly appealing. It's talking about, you know, radiation, which was a prevalent theme in a lot of science fiction and other programs at the time. So all these things that come together.
It's very dynamic, the whole episode and the feel. What do you think is this would be viewed as to a modern audience? How do you think they would take this?
They would find it very slow, you know, and they would find it very dialogue driven. And it's because of the way it's shot, it's very theatrical staging as well, which at one time that wouldn't have been too unusual, but I think to modern audiences it's a completely alien concept, if you excuse the pun.
As someone looking back though and watching it in context, how does that feel? As in, do you appreciate it as it is? How does it stand out?
I would watch it the way I've watched this actually was in terms of it's telling me a television history rather than any kind of entertainment value.
See, that's what I'm doing in the review. We're watching it as sort of a combination of both. Yeah,
I mean, I can get certain things out of it entertainment-wise, but predominantly when I've watched this again, I've thought, oh, look at this, look at that, oh, God, look at the theme, that tells me something about this.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
What do you... oh, go on.
No.
No, go. What is there a moment that stands out for you, particularly in this episode? We always ask. We always do at the end of it. So, what was your highlight? Is there a moment that particularly stands out for you?
Yeah, I actually do like that end bit. That end with Susan turning round. You know, because it's showing the interior of the TARDIS as well, and there's been lots written on how the inside of that TARDIS has developed over the years and over the different doctors. That each new doctor gets a new TARDIS, you know, decorated for him. So I find that stands out to me because one, it's focusing on Susan. And two, it's showing the interior of the TARDIS, which they went to great lengths to do. You know, there was arguments over that. About
Peter Brakaki, the original designer, left.
Yeah,
he did one episode. He did the pilot and then left, and they had to get someone else in.
And they were arguing about whether they should show the inside or not. Believe it or not.
Yeah, shockingly.
I know, it's crazy. Now it's become part of, you know, the iconography.
Part of the furniture.
Yeah, that stands out. I also quite like the other scene is where at the beginning when they're looking for Mercury. And they go into that room and they say, oh, it's a Geiger counter. You know? And it's a graph. And I think he almost forgets his lines, William Hartnell, because he said, this shows we're dealing with an advanced technological society or whatever. And it's the way he says it. I don't know what it is, but it just... And then you look at the equipment, and by today's standards, it just looks...
But then...
Yeah, by that, but then it would have been.
I mean, another thing here, the set design was actually influenced by Gaudi, sort of paintings by Gaudi.
Yeah.
Everything's concentric, everything's quite... It's that very 60s vision of the future. Which,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so those two
those stand
things,
out for you.
They stand out for me.
Would you consider watching the rest?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Definitely. Yeah, of course I would. Yeah.
How-
In fact, I have.
What is your... if you could... Because, of course, this big review we're doing, me and my friend Josh, we're going all through Classic Who.
Yeah.
Is there anything from your childhood memories of classic Doctor Who that you would particularly love to revisit? Because, of course, in those cases, we would invite you back on the show.
Do you know, and this is something I spotted because I watched it after, a couple of years after it had been broadcast. And I can't remember how. I think it was when videos were sort of becoming bigger than Doctor Who.
83 was the first Doctor Who video.
I watched... The one that always gets me is John Pertwee's... is it the Spearhead Invasion?
Spearhead from Space.
Spearhead
His
from
first
Space.
story.
Yeah. And I watched that, and I thought, that's really interesting, because they look like Taylor's dummies and everything. And
All
so-
shot on film as well.
Yeah.
First ever and only Doctor Who story.
And it fascinated me, that story, and it really did. And just the way they used these Taylor's dummies. So when I saw the first of the reboot,
Yes, of course.
I went, whoa, well, yeah, there's the connection. That's this wonderful connection. And I felt it very personally, because I thought, oh, how did they know it was my favourite? how did they know that, you know? And so perhaps that, yeah.
Interesting, that story, Spearhead from Space, only came out... It's the only classic Doctor Who to come out on Blu-ray. Because
Really?
they can, being shot on film. They can
So my taste is
HD.
impeccable then, isn't
So
it?
you can go out and buy the Blu-ray for that. We're not
Yeah.
sponsoring anyone, but it's a very the remastering is brilliant, much better than
Well, do you know,
the grainy stuff we have to watch at the moment.
that kind of that's more freaky than science fiction itself. Actually, the fact that was an episode that I thought was quite interesting.
Yeah.
And then it's the first episode of the reboot, and now you're telling me about Blu-rays.
Yes, the first classic Doctor Who on Blu-ray, which
That's what.
it's for anything to celebrate. Is there anything else you said that you grew up with Tom Baker? Just to go as he's my favourite Doctor.
Yes. The thing that I remember the most about Tom Baker is, would you like a jelly baby?
Yeah.
And his scarves, you know.
Is there anything particular memories from that era? This is solely just me asking as a fan now, as a Tom Baker nut. Because I wish, part of me just say, oh, I wish I was there to see that. But then I think, no, would I? Would I rather stay from my position and look back?
I think you're better in your position, actually.
Yeah.
I think he wasn't appreciated the way he is now at the time.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, everybody knew he was a change, but he nowhere near the kudos that he has now.
That's interesting. Did you carry on watching on till Davison and Colin?
Intermittently.
Okay.
Intermittently. So I sort of would go, long periods of time without watching it and then come back to it.
Yeah. Is there any memories from there? Any particular? Because that's because the 80s is a completely different era to what we are now.
I do remember the failed film.
Paul McGann.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just thinking, this isn't Doctor Who.
No.
It
wasn't, was it?
Interesting, though, that they're trying to bring that back into the canon, though.
Yeah, Paul McGann did his 50th anniversary.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm quite happy for him.
He's
in
a
that
good doctor.
respect,
He's
because
a really
he
good
is.
doctor.
Yeah. I just think the concept for that film was just misguided.
The Doctor's half human. The Master's his brother.
But it's something that we were talking about before we went on air. That you can look at the Doctor Who series, and you can spot moments where they're really trying to push into America.
Now, this is what I actually did want to bring up, but when we've moved on from the survivors, because this was a particularly interesting point, and whilst it may not be key to this episode, it's certainly key to some of the things we'll move on to in the next couple of years, actually, in the review, because in the 60s, Terry Nation tried to launch a Dalek spin-off series in the USA. There's all sorts of that, so your opinion on that,
Well,
please?
the Daleks were... Chapman seems to think that the Daleks were an attempt by Nation and by the BBC to sell Doctor Who to America. So
they made those 2 films, didn't they?
Yeah,
Peter Cushing.
Exactly. So this episode where we first see the Doctor, and it's something that I've read long ago, that the BBC, it wasn't a recent thing. It's always been going on ever since Doctor Who first started.
Yeah,
they've always wanted to try and get it into America, and so when things go badly awry or seem strange in the series or in the product, it's usually because they're trying to break into America.
What would you say? Is there anything that Doctor Who now could take from an episode like The Survivors?
Well, I mean, they're very self-reflexive anyhow, the more recent Doctor Who's anyhow. They're constantly referring back to their own television history, which I find is fascinating for a television programme to reference itself.
From so long ago as well.
Yeah. So perhaps it would take something from there. They would do that. I think they do it anyhow. They're doing it now. What would they take? Well, thematically they're talking about radiation and neutron bombs, so perhaps they could do a variation on that.
Well, nowadays there's all sorts of parallel in science fiction.
Exactly. I'm trying to see if there's a Donald Trump angle.
Well,
but I can't see it.
I'm sure Doctor Who this year's season, I'm sure there'll be something. I'm sure they'll fit in something somewhere.
I'm certain it will be.
What is your current opinion on Doctor Who? You've watched all the new series, I take it.
Yeah, I think it's really good. I think what they did with it, what they've done with it since the 2005 reboot, is amazing, really. And they are more successful in America now.
Yeah. Would you argue that's to the detriment of the UK, though, which is as many critics said? Okay.
No, because I think what's interesting is that they're using that Cool Nation branding idea I was talking about to actually sell it to America. So in the past, to sell it to America, they tried to make it more American, whereas now they're not. They're actually saying, no, it's quintessentially British, and the Americans love anything that's quintessentially British.
Similar to Sherlock in that respect.
Exactly the same, So, yeah. And I mean, would they take anything from that series now? I think what's interesting, perhaps not the series, but it's interesting that Gatterson, An Adventure in Space and Time, is fascinated with that particular moment in time in Doctor Who right at the beginnings. So they're already doing it to a certain extent.
That's pretty true. Regarding what do you think of the recent news of Capaldi's departure? To focus on recent news, where do you feel this is going? I'm not going to say who do you think's next, but
you can ask me that. Because
I will. Go on.
I quite like the Tilda Swinton idea.
Yeah, I was shocked when I heard that. I thought, where do you stand on that? We'll be asking everyone this the next couple of weeks. Where do you stand on the debate? Woman or no woman?
I think it's time for a woman, quite honestly.
Do you think we've reached that point?
Well, I think he can be anything. The Doctor can be anything that the Doctor wants to be, I mean, it's going to be problematic fitting it into the mythos, but I can't see a problem. I always thought that the Missy character was a kind of testing ground.
I do. I do have a lot of issues with the writing-wise in the Missy character.
Yeah, me and you both. But,
aspect, isn't it, entirely?
But I always saw that as a kind of a testing ground. And Rose, of course. Any of the strong companions.
River Song, arguably. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of River Song.
No, but again, you can see that they're testing the audience. They're looking for a strong female character in that series. There's Idris Elba.
Oh, who could be the Doctor? Idris Elba, I feel he's too ingrained in Luther. I think I'll just look at the Doctor and I won't see the Doctor, I'll see Luther.
Yeah, but he'll be new to others.
Yeah, true.
I don't know. I wouldn't. It wouldn't bother me in the slightest if it was a woman chosen.
No. Are you looking forward to the new starts in 2018? Yeah. When we have Chris Chibnall take over.
Yeah, because I think we're moving on from the Moffat sort of era, and so they've had plenty of time to think about it.
They definitely have.
So it promises something big. Perhaps
Do you think it will deliver? That's the big question.
I do,
That's what's on my
actually.
mind at the moment.
I do. I think for them to take this length of time,
To have a year off as well.
yeah, I think they clearly are taking stock,
Mhm.
and the BBC are very good at that kind of thing. They're very good at looking at what works and what doesn't work, and yeah. Perhaps that's the future of television. You see these gaps with Sherlock, don't you?
Massive gap.
Massive gaps.
Might have an even bigger one ahead of us.
Yeah. So perhaps we're seeing the development in television in general.
A final question for it's completely separate to Doctor Who. From your youth, you mentioned classic television programs that you used to watch. Is there any that you think would deserve a reboot?
Do you know, I used to love the Jerry Anderson stuff.
Oh.
So UFO, perhaps. UFO by Jerry Anderson.
Where do you stand on the puppet stuff for Anderson? Because Thunderbirds is back.
Thunderbirds, yeah, I don't like what they've done with Thunderbirds, the reboots.
The model work in it is good.
Yeah.
The mixture, but the CGI characters is where I draw a line. They should all have the strings.
Isn't it funny how you miss the strings?
It's a charm, isn't it?
Yeah, at the time, you probably thought this would make a great actual feature film.
Well, we got that, didn't we?
Exactly.
Did you like that film?
No, because I missed the strings.
It didn't feel like Thunderbirds,
It didn't feel like Thunderbirds, Yeah, perhaps Jerry Anderson. UFO I would like to see updated.
One that I must say, I've got a big pet love of this. I'd love to see a live-action Captain Scarlet.
I've always wanted to see a live-action Captain Scarlet.
I feel a series of live-action Captain Scarlet, ITV. I'm begging you. That would be wonderful.
I will beg to.
We can beg together.
Because I love Thunderbirds, but Captain Scarlet was something quite different. There was always something quite
It's my favourite Jerry Anderson. Probably one of my favourite shows from childhood. I love Captain Scarlet.
Yeah, and I like the concept of the angels.
Yeah.
The Women Air Force, and I quite like Captain Blue and Black and Scarlet and White. And,
I love White. I love Colonel White. Oh, stiff upper lip.
I know.
Put into puppet form.
Yeah. You can see traces of it in UFO.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
I think you can see traces of it in UFO.
Where do you stand on Space 1999?
I never enjoyed it, and yet I know.
I'm not. I think season 1's okay. Season 2 is.
I never
a little bit
enjoyed
silly.
it. I don't know. No, never enjoyed it. I never got into it as I did the others.
Should we bring up Blake Seven?
No.
And on that bombshell, we've travelled together through the city of the Daleks all the way to the petrified forest, and for that I'd like to thank you, Kenneth Longden.
Okay, thank you, Ryan.
And I'd like to thank you, dear listener, for travelling with us today Beyond the TARDIS. Me and Josh will be back next Saturday as the complete review continues with The Escape. And for details of where you'd like to see where we'll be going next in Beyond the TARDIS, you can visit us either on the show yourself, by contacting us via Facebook or Twitter at Doctor Who TCR. So thank you from me, and thank you from Kenneth. Goodbye.
Goodbye.